Hello, friends. Welcome. Welcome, everyone. My name's Tammy Simon. I'm the founder of Sounds True, and it's my great joy to be with you here for a special session on the power of storytelling, helping you get your work out into the world. I'm joined by Richard Taubinger, the founder of Conscious Marketer, and Kylie Slavic, who's the director of storytelling and brand development for Conscious Marketer. This is the second session in our three-part series. So I heard from many people that they missed the first session and they wanted to make sure they could watch it. So I want to let you know that that replay is available if by chance you missed our first session, which was on the inner call to tell your story and why people want to hear it. So we'll put a link in the chat so you can watch that replay. And here we are together for our second session. We're going to be looking at overcoming the core blocks to telling your story and falling in love with storytelling. You ready? Let's do this, as they say. I always I don't say that often, but why not? Let's do this. Okay, Kylie and Richard, overcoming the core blocks. What would you say from all of your work with so many people are the three biggest core blocks to sharing your story with other people? Kylie, why don't you get us started?
Yeah, so the first one that I see all the time is I don't have a story or nobody wants to hear it. And there is a TED Talk by a guy named Brian Stevenson. And this is kind of just goes along with I don't have a story. I want to share this anecdote with you. Brian Stevenson is somebody that works in Alabama. He gets people that are unfairly on death row off of death row. He's gotten 77 people off of death row. And he did a TED Talk about it. And a lot of times these really challenging topics are not taken in so well by people. They feel confronted by it. They feel like it's too painful and all of that type of thing. So Brian, he opened up his TED Talk with a story about his grandmother. And he said, when he was a little kid, his grandmother came up to him and said, "Brian, you're so special. Don't ever drink beer." And so he never drank beer. And when he was 16 years old, his bigger brother, his older brother asked him to drink a beer. And he said, "No, I'm not going to do that." And his brother said, "Oh, did grandma tell you you were special?" And so he opened his TED Talk with this story. And during his talk, you get 18 minutes for a TED Talk. In that 18 minutes, he raised $1 million for his nonprofit unsolicitedly by people just picking up their cell phones and just donating to him because they felt so connected to him, even though his topic, a lot of us have a message that is not mainstream, or maybe people struggle to hear it a little bit. And his was definitely that way. And so he also got the longest standing ovation in the entire TED history. And when people asked him at the end of his talk, they said, "Why did you tell a story about your grandmother?" And he said, "Because everybody has had one or they have one." And what that tells me is that people want to hear your everyday story. So if you don't think you have a story, think no farther than like what you did this morning or what you did yesterday or your family dynamics or your relationships that you've had. My friend Jeffrey, who did a bonus in our upcoming course, he says, and the way he says it is, you don't have to have a Mount Kilimanjaro story. So in order for people to want to hear your story, you don't have to be somebody who's climbed the Himalaya mountains with no shoes and a pair of shorts. You don't have to be somebody that stopped a war. You just have to be human, and you just have to share your human side. And you can see from Brian's story how much that impacted his audience. Just a really simple story about his grandmother. So look no farther than your everyday experiences. And I can guarantee you have a lot of stories. So I don't have a story. This is probably the top block I've seen from everyone that I've worked with. And later on in the training today, I'll share some of the different results people got when they really got over that. Now, the second piece of this, and Richard will also have a lot to say about it, is that maybe I have one, but nobody wants to hear it. And I was speaking at an event a couple of years ago called the Movement Makers Playground. And there was a woman who was speaking. She's an award-winning journalist from Australia, and she was teaching people about how podcasters are starving for stories and how they really want your story, because if you're not famous, it hasn't been widely spread or widely heard. And so this stuck with me. This like burned into my brain when she said this. She said, how many of you want to hear another story about X? And X was like a really famous person in our industry, and nobody raised their hand. And then she said, well, what about X? And nobody raised their hand. And she was like, who wants to hear the story of the person sitting right next to you? And everybody raised their hand. And so I found that so profound. I couldn't, and everybody, so people do want to hear your story because it hasn't been widely circulated. And the podcasters also, we're going to talk about this a little later, they want to share stories that haven't been as widely circulated because they want to be the first person to share that particular story. A few other things I can say about just overcoming this block of nobody wants to hear my story. First of all, you're the only one that has your story. So I don't know anybody with my story about going from being a spoken word artist to getting good at online marketing. And truly that story helps my clients feel like they can do it. A lot of other stories in the marketing niche are these like rags to riches story, but a lot of them are really pie in the sky. They're intimidating. They're hard to believe. They're braggy. And because I know my story can help people, I have what Richard would call a sacred obligation to tell my story. He uses that word with like putting ourselves out there, that it's actually a sacred obligation. The other thing I would say about this is your story helps people open up about their own life hardships. Okay. It helps people open up about their own life hardships when they hear from you. And that helps them to create meaning, like we talked about in the last training. And it also helps them heal. The last thing I'll say about this is that your story can humanize your brand or your services that you're offering, and it can also humanize your spiritual teachings. And when you can do that, it's a lot easier for people to take them in. I did a storytelling session and wrote a brand story for a company that is in the eco laundry zero waste niche. They've come up with one of the first laundry detergents that's zero waste, and they've saved landfills from like billions of pieces of plastic jugs and everything like that. They asked me to help tell their story because when you're telling a story about laundry detergent, not that many people get excited about it. But I asked him, and this was kind of like, I was being a little facetious when I started talking to Ryan, the founder. And I just said, hey, Ryan, do you have a story about puppies or babies? Because, people really love that. And I was joking. And he said, actually, I was sitting there when my wife was pregnant with our third son. And, because she was sleeping in a little bit late, I was downstairs with the kids, fixing them milk and watching their YouTube channel. And this little kid toy influencer, which, yeah, that's actually a thing. There's a little kid toy influencer. He got this package of a toy, and he was showing the different toys that he was introducing people to different toys and getting paid to do so quite well for being an 8-year-old as well. And so he got this box out, and it was in plastic wrap, and he opened the plastic wrap and the box was plastic, and he opened the box and all the little components of the toy were wrapped in plastic. All the pieces of the toys were plastic. And he got really anxious about that. And he was like, oh my God, I have to do something about this. I feel like this company is like pushing plastic. And he was really concerned about climate change and pollution and different things his kids were going to grow up with. And that was how he started his eco laundry company. He started thinking like, how can I reduce plastic? So now what I've done there, when I helped him to tell that story, and we wrote, there's more to the story, but I'll just share that much for now. It helped people to look at his company and not just see a bottle of laundry detergent, but it's actually a strip. It's not a bottle, but they saw the human side of it, because it's not that easy to get people to switch brands. They're like, well, I like this toothpaste, or I like this kind of pizza, or I like these shoes. But when we insert a story into it, people really want to hear that, and they get more excited about what it is that you're doing.
All right. The first block, well said. What about related to that? It's all been said before, like I'm saying, I'm going to tell my story, but it's whatever I have to share. It's been said before. Come on, really? So much noise out there. How do I get more confidence? This is related to this. No one wants to hear it. It's all been said before. What would you say, Kylie, to that?
It definitely has not all been said before. I mean, even just going back to that story about Brian Stevenson, he said straight up, everybody has a grandmother, but nobody had the story about the grandmother saying, hey, you know, you're special. You can do anything. Don't drink beer. And then going to his brother. And that story had major impact on the audience. Like I said, they donated $1 million to his cause. They were able to take in a message that's kind of hard for a lot of people to look at. It can be painful and sensitive topic, and people really loved it. And when I've seen my clients share their stories, a lot of people's work has the same transformational results as each other. Like if you're a massage therapist and you're helping people with their wellness, or you're an acupuncturist and you're helping people with migraines, there's millions of people who do that, but nobody has the story of why you do it, why you started doing it, what were your life experiences that led you to do it. And if you start to dig into that stuff a little bit, there is not another human being on this planet that has that story. I also truly believe that there's people that only you can help. Like they could go to other people, but the person they really need is you. And the way that they're going to find you is through your story. And that's how they're going to be attracted to you. That's how they're going to know you. That's how you're going to develop that sort of trust factor that is required in order for people to buy into your brand or buy into your spiritual teachings.
Okay, Kylie, I know you've worked with hundreds and hundreds of people to distill these common blocks that so many people suffer from. What's the second one?
The second block? Well, yeah, I can talk about that. But Richard, do you have anything to say about I don't have a story or no one wants to hear it? I did a lot of talking there. I want to pass it off too.
Yeah, I just have a few thoughts before we move on. Well, first of all, as a dad, I remember we mostly bought wooden toys, but one Christmas my sister bought like this plastic kitchen, and there was like 496 plus pieces, and it was all plastic. So I can resonate with that story. You know, one of the important things to remember is that, and Kylie kind of mentioned a little bit about this, but I just want to bring it to the surface because I think it's so important. But if you feel like you're just an ordinary person, or you're nothing special, or that, you know, who are you to tell your story? I think that's okay. But just remember that it's because you're ordinary that it's believable, right? So if somebody has come from a spoon-fed background and they've made money, you're like, oh yeah, like, of course that person had this advantage, or this person, or maybe they're a meditation teacher that's well known and they tell their story, and you're like, well, of course that person is successful because they have this huge following. But when you tell your story, especially if it's a story of transformation, or it's because you're ordinary that your story actually is important. That it's the stories we crave. I don't know how many people are like underdog fans. I'm like a huge underdog fan. Like if you like on movies and stuff, and if you think of a lot of the stories, you know, whether it doesn't even matter what genre it is, whether it's a war movie or a comeback story, it's the hero, it's the Harry Potter underneath it's the ordinary person that has magical powers that create something extraordinary. And so just remember that's a really important aspect. The other thing I'll just say about this is there's something called the expert's curse. We call it the expert's curse because we get to where we are in life and we kind of forget our own story. We kind of forgot all the years we've put in. We forget some of the key stories that got us to where we got. So we kind of have to push the rewind button. And sometimes our stories have some trauma or some events. And so we have to kind of go back in time to extract the stories. But what happens when we achieve whatever we achieve, whether we are in a good relationship or we overcome some illness or whatever your transformation is, when you come back as the teacher, as the mentor, we don't assign the significance of how important, and we have to rewind to how we got there, because that's the great teaching for other people. And often it's the transformation from extraordinary to. And then the final thing I'll just say about this is it's so important, because if you read a book, if you're talking to somebody, if they're giving you information, facts, if you think of the last book you've read, you're going to remember one of two things, and everything else you're going to forget. The first thing is you're going to remember the model or whatever the system is. If there's like a unique model in there, you'll remember that, especially if it's graphical. It's hard to forget a model. We're not teaching that on this course. We teach that in other places. But the other thing that you'll remember is if you read a story in there, like you're never going to forget the plastic strip story with detergent that Kylie just told you. In fact, you're kind of wondering, what brand is that? And who's this person? Like it's like embedded in your brain, you know? And so it's like Kylie said, it's how we make meaning, but also we filter out everything. And so the story captivates us and involves all of our senses. And what happens when you tell a story is people start to paint the picture, and then you become rememberable. Is that a word? I think I just created a new word. Rememberable? Is that a word? I don't think that's a word.
It is now.
So yeah, so those are just a few things. And so all of your stories really do matter. And that's why we named the course this, because it's so important. This is how we give our gifts. This is how we fulfill our sacred obligation, because you've been gifted with your life and all the stories. And so how you pass that on to others is by telling your story.
I want to piggyback on something you said, which was about being an underdog, because I saw a lot, I'm looking at everybody and I saw a lot of hands go up when you said who identifies with being an underdog. Actually, about 7 or 8 years ago, I went to a conference called Storynomics with a guy named Robert McKee, and he's a big deal in the filmmaking world. And he's an amazing, amazing storyteller and theorist on story. And one of the things that he said in that conference was that there's an overdog and there's an underdog, and that 99.99% of the population relates to being the underdog. And that 0.01% is more like the sociopaths and narcissists, and they see themselves as having power over and wanting power over. And because most of us relate to being the underdog, when you see a story of the ordinary person accomplishing something great or accomplishing something small that people can relate to, that they also want to accomplish, your brain is actually wired to be attracted to that story, because you put yourself in whatever story it is and you experience those triumphs and those overcoming of those challenges. You experience them as if it was happening to you. So that's another reason that people really do want to hear your story. You give them a feeling of a small win every time you share your story, which is, I think, a great service to do for people.
Wonderful. All right, Kylie, the second obstacle people have.
Absolutely. So I think this is something that Richard has seen a little bit more than I have. But one of the things that he said when we were having this conversation is that it shouldn't be about me, because that's ego. And I can tell you, people do experience that. They're like, I don't want to talk about myself. I don't want to talk about myself. But you're always really talking about the person you're talking to. And I gave you a story format in the last training that we did, where we talked about looking at the emotional arc of experience that your audience is having. They may be in a lower emotional state and they want to experience freedom or love or hope or something of that, or faith, or, whatever it is, inspiration. And you plug in your personal details to that arc. So how do people feel? How do they want to feel? Where is somebody at in their life? Where are they not in at their life? And so if we're trying to get people to hear our spiritual teachings and or buy into our business or brand or our services, the story is actually always about them, because we're putting them first and we're thinking about, what do they need to hear from my life that I can share that's going to help them to get to where they want to go. Now, you have a plethora of other stories that may be appropriate to share in different settings, like with your friends or with your family or with your therapist or with, people that are in your peer, your community, your spiritual community. But when you're sharing a story for the purpose of moving somebody into a different feeling state, which is what we want to do with spiritual teachings and business storytelling, marketing storytelling, then you are actually always putting the audience first, and your personal details that you're filling in there are about service, not self.
Richard?
Yeah. And I would just say that, we all have, everybody on this call is on a pretty deep inner journey. Otherwise you wouldn't be here, and you're with Tammy and Sounds True, and that's amazing. And so we can all kind of smell when somebody's coming from a place that isn't pure, you know? And so I think this intention is that you want to do good in the world and how you can be of greatest service. And if somebody's telling their story, you can kind of sense and feel when it's about them, you know? And so we've worked with probably over 1,000 creators and people. And I always know because they use the word I a lot, I versus like relating it to the audience. So I think a lot of it is your intent should, yeah, there's no should, but if the way we would suggest that would be a better way is to come from a place of service, come from a place that's drawn from your higher self, drawn, getting online and asking, how can I share something so that it can impact people to make a change or to inspire them to make a change? And if you come from that place, kind of, I'm saying basically the same thing that Kylie said, but if it comes from your lower self with a small s, then if it's like, look at how cool I am, or look at this great result that I did. Sometimes you can see this in testimonials. You'll see somebody post this online. It always makes me it turns my stomach, actually, you know, when a coach or a consultant or somebody's like, my client just had this result and they worked with me to get to do this and this and this. And if you want that same result, contact me here. And I'm like, oh my God, that's just like so bad. Sometimes it's even worse than that. That was actually not too bad, but it gets a lot worse. What they should say, and if you go to conscious coaches or consultants or therapists or whatever it is, hey, I want to acknowledge this person who got this transformation. They did the hard work and they did it themselves. And I want to call out this person because they made this transformation in their life. Do you feel the difference? It's like in one instance, I'm highlighting the results and I'm not taking any credit. I'm like, hey, this person went in there and did the work by themselves. And then what the other thing too is, what's interesting about this is if I listen to the first one, it makes my stomach turn. I don't actually want to trust that person. I'm like, I don't want to be the next testimonial for this person like that. Like, I don't want to be that person, and especially if they're using the name. But when I see somebody going, hey, look at this person that did the work, I'm like, oh, he's building a community. Oh, he's helping people to do the work themselves and to be inspired. And you can it's like, you can taste it, you can smell it. And it's just a different place. It's like, are you doing soul-led marketing, higher self-led marketing? Or are you coming from this lower state? And so I'll say one more thing about this, and then I actually want to hear what Tammy has to say about this. But the part of yourself that says it's coming from the ego is actually the ego trying to protect the ego. I'm going to say that again in a couple different ways. So the part of yourself that is not getting in front to tell your story is actually your ego trying to protect itself from any criticism and stuff like this. And we'll go into that in the next block, but it's literally, it's your ego protecting the ego, because the higher self, I'm not going to know the exact phrase, but there's a phrase in the Course of Miracles. I don't know how many people have read Course of Miracles, but it's actually the only book referenced in The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle. He references The Power of Miracles. That's an interesting fact about Course of Miracles. But there's a phrase in there that it basically says your presence or your higher self never hides. It wants to get out there and shine, basically. And I'm paraphrasing because I don't have the direct quote in front of me. But your higher self wants to come through you, wants to channel through you. And it wants to be in connection with other people through your stories and through you being online, so that it can influence and impact other people in positive ways. The part of yourself that is saying to yourself, I shouldn't be out there because that's all ego based, is actually a fearful part. So just ask yourself which part is in control here. And I'm not getting into IFS and all that other stuff, but it's just an interesting thing to notice. And I know, Tammy, you had, it took a while for you to realize how powerful your story was. Like, I'm kind of curious how you made that shift so that you could, realize that actually, from the first obstacle, people wanted to hear your story, and then have it come. You've always come from a pure place, but I'm curious what your thoughts are on these obstacles.
Okay. One thing to add to each obstacle. The first one, nobody wants to hear your story. I think I had a lot of questions early on. Who wants to hear what I have to say, really? And I remember my wife saying to me, Tammy, it's not up to you. It's up to other people. Just go ahead, speak, answer questions when you're interviewed, and see what happens. And so that was interesting too, was that I had all of this judgment. And when I opened up and just saw the reaction and what happened when I spoke from my true heart, genuinely in any given moment, lo and behold, people were really interested. And that's continued to this day. So I think that's a very interesting idea. It's not actually up to me to make the evaluation. Now, Richard, what you were just talking about, this notion of getting out of our own way, if you will, I wrote down before this session, getting really big is the most egoless thing you can do. That actually staying small is a posture of defense. It's a posture of hiding. And being forward, being outward, being transparent, being as big as we are with our energy, with our story, with our life, is actually the most egoless thing we can do, because we have to let go of so much. We have to let go of so much armor. We have to let go of so much anticipated criticism. We have to let go of tying ourselves in knots and, putting all that knotted self under the rug someplace and hiding it away. It actually requires us to let go of our ego, to come forward in a full, big, huge, generous, lavish, giving way. So that's been my discovery. And it brings us, I think, to our third block, which is, I think, the biggest one for so many people. I know, Kylie, you mentioned maybe the biggest one was nobody wants to hear it. But in my experience, talking to people again and again, the biggest block is other people's judgment, the fear of humiliation, if you will. Other people are going to say, well, that wasn't all that interesting, or, they used a word, rememberable. That's not even a real word. And Tammy stuttered when she was saying that. And on top of it, I think she had something on her face. I don't know. We're so afraid of what people think and how we're going to be torn down, especially in the public sphere. And I think that fear is very, very real for many people. So how do we overcome that obstacle in your experience?
Yeah, Richard, I'd love to defer to you on that, but I want to speak to a very specific aspect of that, and then I'll toss it back to you. And that is, will I hurt somebody with my story? So that's like a really big fear that comes up over and over. And I had a client named Paula. She's just such a lovely woman from Argentina. And she was very blocked around telling her story because it involved a family member that had a certain medical condition when she was growing up. And it caused her to go into what she calls the good girl, where in order to get attention, because he got so much of the attention, in order to get any attention, she turned into like the good girl who did everything right. And it really brought her away from her authentic self. So her whole story is about returning to that authenticity. And I helped her with it. And we approached it from a couple of angles. One, we focused less on the actual story about her brother and how that impacted her. And we focused less on the details of that, and we focused more on the impact it had and how she overcame that impact. The other thing is we waded into the pool very slowly. She disclosed a little bit about it and kind of saw, like, how did her family react? How did her clients react? And then she added a little bit more. And here's what happened for her during that time period. She ended up, so a woman went, she put the story on her website, and she had a sales call with a woman, just like a call to see if her program was a good fit. And the woman said, I just went to your website before this call. I don't care how much your program costs. I know that you're my mentor. I know that I'm supposed to work with you. After that, she started a movement called the Empowered Woman movement that came from that core wound of her childhood with, I'm trying to be the good girl all the time. And it turned into a global brand. She got a TEDx talk in Italy. And when she does her webinars, like what we're doing here, and she has some higher end programs, she gets 50% of the 100 or 200 people that show up that want to join her program, which I've never seen, ever seen anything like that in my entire career. And it all came from her really getting honest with herself about what to share and what not to share about that particular trauma. And she's just like impacting so many people today. She also just started, because she's a coach and she has that movement in English is not her first language. She's from Buenos Aires, and she is now starting her coaching company in the Spanish speaking market, which is like the United States is ahead of the curve with most of the personal development stuff. And it's starting to grow in other countries. And she's been teaching in Spanish and bringing empowerment to people that don't have the same level of empowerment that we have in the Western, in like the European and American countries. It's the Central and South America still have a lot of like the women's places here. And she's able to change that. She's able to change that conversation, which is such a big, huge deal. So those are the things that came from her getting over that fear of people's judgment and moving into her own power around sharing her story. I love that story because it's just, it was such immediate feedback that sharing that story was the right thing. And she just was able to grow and reach so many people and help so many people and continue to do so. And I'm curious, Richard, as far as what you think about, like, how do I get over that fear of being judged, or people are going to make fun of me or pick on me or think I'm stupid or whatever it is?
Yeah, I have a couple thoughts, and it's kind of interesting because throughout my career in this space, maybe 17, 18 years, I found myself behind camera with a lot of like kind of really big authors and big spiritual teachers. And one of the things I want to point out about this fear and judgment and embarrassment is that, first of all, just raise your hand if you have some of that, a little bit of it, okay. So just look around and just first realize that we all have it. And then I want to put you at ease and go, almost every teacher that I've worked with has the same thing. And guess what? The number one question they ask me after we filmed: how did I do? Did I do okay? Or did it sound good? Like every one of them. And even me, like Tammy, myself, and Kylie will get off this and we'll text each other. How did we go? Did I sound okay? And so like even us, like we've had over 13,000 people register for this. It's interesting. I didn't have any fear coming on here, but because I'm just trying to stay in channel, but I will go, okay, did we do okay at the end of this? So I just want you to first recognize that everybody has this fear, and even the big people. And there's a lot of stories about even famous people, like Johnny Carson used to puke every time before he'd go on stage. Like people that you're like think are so polished, they have that as well. So just realize that, I want you to be unique and special, but you're not. Like we all have this, okay? Like this is just the reality. So once you realize that it's just kind of the nature of being human, and that I do think there is a point where you can get over it and it becomes a lot easier. Okay. And that's through practice. The second thing that I would say about this is, so recognize that everybody has it. The second thing is don't deny it. So I think maybe it's because I've worked with so many therapists like Dick Schwartz and Esther Perel and Terry Real and Diane Poole-Heller and all these people, these big therapists. I've been through all their trainings because we've filmed them all, like it's, so you have to kind of take the training. But one of the worst things that you can do is to ignore the fear or to pretend it's not there. And so just say to yourself, hey, I've got this fear of judgment. And where's that coming from? Oh, it's because I was ridiculed as a child, or I have this trauma. And so you can just recognize it and just sit with it, meditate with it, be with it. And don't reject it. Like just be with the feeling. And then that's okay, and it's going to come up. And then the third thing is you just make the choice. You make the choice. Like, it's more important for me if I take some flack or some negative comment, especially from a family member, possibly, those are the hard ones, right? Or whatever. It's worth it, because if I can help some people transform their lives, if I can tell my story and inspire somebody to get online and tell their story, or to create a program, and they go out and, some of the things that we've done have helped, some of the programs have reached millions of people. This is cool stuff, And so if you have a choice, I'm going to sit with this fear and let that win, or I'm going to go out and transform lives. You have to just a lot say, yeah, it's there. And just remember the people. If you don't go out and share your story, and you had to go up to the door and knock on, maybe you're in the relationship space and see the failed marriage, or the kids torn apart because you could have helped them, or see, in some cases it's more severe. Somebody commits suicide, or somebody doesn't get the healing they need to improve their health, and their life ends early. Like, these are the stakes for a lot of you. Have really powerful medicines that you give the market, and just because of this small little, if you start to frame it that way, the fear, it gets smaller. And then the last thing I would say is, you don't need to share your deepest, darkest, most badass story, all at once. It's not like you need to. So just go incrementally, go in pieces, and start to share bits and pieces here and there. And as you do that, then you start to you'll get some negative feedback, but you're going to get tons of positive feedback too. So focus on that positive feedback. And just focus on that positive feedback. I actually have my team try to filter out negative comments and stuff. I'm personally sensitive. I don't like to see it. I will accept anything that's constructive, that's helping me become a better person, or better marketer, or better thing. I want to hear that content, but some content is from haters that are just going to hate, and they're always going to be out there. And so just recognize that that's the nature of life. It's not just the nature of online marketing. And then the great secret that I'll end with here is that as you start to do that process, then getting online, communicating, becoming a messenger for your own story and others, it's a spiritual process. And so you're getting online and sharing your message, but you're actually moving through stuff in your own psyche, and you're becoming more, and you're becoming more grounded. You're working through the fears. And so it literally is part of your personal development work to do this. And I think it's really powerful. Going to turn it over to you, Tammy.
Sure. Thank you, Richard. I love hearing you talk about the process of, I would say putting on your big girl pants. That's what I say to myself, making that choice that even if we are afraid, to move forward anyway. And I have found that it's really interesting when you are afraid and you do something anyway, it develops, it cultivates a certain kind of inner power when you do that, when you walk right into something that you're afraid of. And for those of you who have fears around coming forward, I just want to say, I think that I will match whatever fear you're feeling. I matched it in my life. I actually thought I would be killed. Like, what came up for me were all of these different, I don't know if they were past lives, if they were just metaphors in my psyche, but that if I really spoke out from my unique inner self, which has a lot of outlier qualities, how I felt in my life, that I would actually be killed. And I remember a mentor said to me, "No, Tammy, you'll just be criticized." And I thought, oh, that's really interesting. I'll just be criticized. That's not the same as getting killed. I've got to put this in the right perspective. I can handle being criticized. I can handle that. I can put my big girl pants on. And just one other comment about that, which is, I think some of it had to do with a kind of perfectionism. What if I don't say it perfectly? What if it doesn't come across perfectly? And a mentor said to me, you know, Tammy, people don't need more polished perfection in the world. What they're really looking for is something real talk, something genuine, something authentic. That's what cuts through. That's what people want today. And I was like, really? I can do that. I can do that all the time. You mean I just have to be myself? Yeah, you just have to be yourself. I'm like, I can always do that. Even when I screw up, I can do that. I can apologize. I can go back. I can say, that was weird. That was awkward. Let me try that again. I can just be myself. Oh my God. It was so liberating. So I share that with you. It's not about perfection.
Yeah.
It's about the genuine you. Okay. Another big question that I think comes up for people as an obstacle is when it comes to looking at my story, there's a whole lot of it. There's a whole lot of life events. Which part comes into focus? What do I highlight? How do I sort through and choose what's really going to be salient and beneficial to others?
Mm-hmm. I'll mention a couple of things about that. I've said this before in every single way possible, and it's just the most important thing I can say. Always be of service first. So think about, who do you want to help? Think about what in your personal life story is going to help them. Think about how they feel, how they want to feel, and what kind of anecdotes can you put in there that's going to help them. And one way to look is like when you felt that way and how you overcame it. The second question, when did you feel that way, and what were your obstacles and challenges along that way, and how did you overcome it? So when I'm doing, especially like business storytelling, because that's what I do, that's what I said. That's the first questions I ask people. And usually that's enough to get a great story. And you have hundreds of stories that will follow that arc, because we're always on our journey from feeling a certain way to feeling a different way. So you'll have hundreds of stories. You'll never run out. And actually call that your client's hero's journey, where it's like from this to this, and how do I insert stories that follow that flow? The other question you want to ask yourself is, with the very specific details that you're choosing to share, are you going to create oxytocin, which we talked about a lot in the last training, or cortisol? So, and that's like the stress hormone. So if we have trauma in our story, which it's okay to share, really, truly, if you have trauma, it helps people heal when they feel understood. You want to make sure to take them all the way through the resolution, though. Otherwise they can get stuck in the trauma. So one thing I heard from that same guy, Robert McKee, was that there's something in the brain that can't tell the difference between a story and reality. So when they hear your story, they're experiencing it. So if you do have some trauma, then you want to make sure you show the resolution of that trauma, and that actually helps people feel more connected. And then, like, just another tip on that for me, if I wanted to share something about my 20-year struggle with addiction, I'm going to dip in and out pretty quickly. I'm not going to give them all the intimate details. I don't want to trigger them in any kind of way. Most people have been affected and impacted by somebody that has struggled with addiction. And I want to make sure to share that story from an inspiring place and a place of hope, where people who are also going through that in any way are going to feel like they can do it too. And essentially, I always want to make sure with every story that I tell that it's invoking empathy, that it's about connection, that it's about trust, that it's about learning. And I really, really want to share the details that will help inspire people into action, into their own greatness. And so the best way to do that I've ever seen over and over again is showing how I overcame challenges that seem particularly difficult to overcome.
Richard?
Yeah, it's such a good question. And, you know, what I would say is that we all have these key pivot points in our lives. And so you're going to have some stories that you return to over and over again. Kylie and I will be teaching a lot of that in the upcoming course. So you're going to want to have your staple of like probably three core stories that you tell in different ways. But I'll just give you a different way to think of it. A lot of the initial stories, when you're talking to people that you want to help and transform, you have to ask what blocks or what mindsets are they holding, or what objections do they have, and then what stories relate to those. And that can help you define some of the stories. So, you know, if somebody's objection to storytelling was, I'm just terrible on video, then I would tell stories about clients who were or my journey on being on video and how terrible I was, and I might show a video of like one of my first videos. That's just, you can go on YouTube actually and watch some of my first videos. They're terrible. They're just absolutely terrible, and I would show those videos and go, okay, this is how I learned it. And And so you can start to you can start to think through like what the mindsets or the objections your future clients are going to have. And then you share those. And what's interesting about that is what you're wanting to do with people through storytelling often is, for many people, they believe that it's impossible that they can even change. Let me repeat that. Many people think it's impossible to change. Some people believe something's totally impossible for the world, but you want to move them from, hey, this is impossible, to, hey, somebody else did this. But then you have to get them past this other barrier. It's like a hidden barrier. And it's basically, it's possible for you. This is below the line. Yeah, you did it, but I can't do it. You need them to cross the threshold to, hey, it's possible for me. And so a lot of your stories I've actually never taught this, or I taught it in one place before, but if you can get them from moving from, yeah, it's possible, but it's just because you had this special thing, or you had that, or it was your mom, or you had this whatever, to, oh, this is possible because I can see that the people you've worked with have it. Oh, I can see how you got over it. Once that happens, whether they become a client or not, you've done something important. You've been of service to that person, because whether they work with you or not, their life can change. They can go find somebody else. They can work with you. They can do it themselves. But even for this call right here, if we can share, and some of you will work with us, and if you don't, but if you realize, oh, this is possible, and I realize how important story is, and you go out and you do it, we're happy because we know that our job has been done. So there's a few ideas.
I love that.
I'm going to put you on the spot for a moment, Richard, and I'll put myself on the spot with you, which is, you said at one point during this conversation that, for this conversation, I just want to stay in the channel. And I thought, oh, good. What's Richard talking about? I think I know what he's talking about. He's in some kind of flow of communication that's coming through you. And I wonder if you could share a little bit more about what that means for you when you say in the channel, and how that also relates to what we share in any given moment. What aspect of our story, what's relevant and salient to share right now at this moment from that place?
Well, it's such a good question. And what I realized from the where this came from is, I would be behind camera with people, and people would get awkward when they were like, "Hi, my name's so and so, and I'm da 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 da," and they would be like deer in the headlights and freeze in front of the camera. And many of you've, even with a Zoom, if you're on there, you just freeze, because it's not natural. You're not used to saying, hey, at the end of this webinar, we're going to do this, or, hey, thanks for watching this video, go click the button. Like our mind engages. Okay. And when our mind engages, then we start to think through things, and it becomes a mental thing. But on the flip side, I found that when somebody was teaching, when somebody was telling a story, the mind goes silent actually, and you just share. And, I know a lot of you are Eckhart Tolle fans, as I am. And he has a lot of, I've been listening to his series on Spotify recently. But he's like, the mark of somebody that's truly enlightened is their mind just goes quiet, And so sharing your story is a little bit like that. You don't want an active mind. We have like a template here, but I don't have any notes. I don't know what I'm going to say. I'm being totally present and just allowing what needs to come through to be of greatest service to you all. And so this is a trained ability. And when I'm working with somebody, I'm always thinking to myself, are they in channel or are they out of channel? And so when they're in channel, they're just in this natural flow. It's coming through them. And they're in channel. As soon as somebody's out of channel, you can watch videos of people go in and out of channel. And it's interesting. The hard part is to train yourself to be in channel, even when you're saying, hey, below this video, click the button. That's harder, right? because that's not so natural. The good news for everybody here is that one of the easiest ways to stay in channel is to tell a story. And so, because when we tell stories, we don't have to think. We just share. It's like a human ability. And so that literally puts you in a natural channel to your higher self.
And I'm glad you shared. Yep, that's exactly what I was looking for, because I think it's part of what is the unique approach that you and Kylie bring to storytelling and how our story matters. And when I was reflecting on, what part of a story is useful to tell in any given moment, I thought, well, I go inside and I scan my inner body and I see what's actually really alive, what's burning inside. And I go for this burning quality, this inner imperative quality, this thing that's like, it's knocking inside me saying, come on, come on, come on, almost like a frog that wants to jump out. And, and it's a little different than using an analytical process of saying, what's going to help people, blah, blah, blah. It's more being tuned in. And I think that's important, that in the course that you and Kylie teach, you're bringing together this intuitive flow, this accessing of what's beyond our analytical abilities with an analytical sense of what people need and want, and the neuroscience of storytelling and direct marketing techniques. You're really putting it all together into a Your Story Matters package. So I just wanted to emphasize that. One final question, and then we'll talk a little bit more about the upcoming course, which is, can you just share with people why this ability to tell your story is so critical for things like hosting a podcast, developing a TED Talk, possible career advancement opportunities? Why is this such a central capacity? Richard?
Well, it's kind of, we can keep this one kind of short, but if you really think about all of the podcasts that you listen to, if you think of the TED Talks that captivate you, if you think about the books, like even Eckhart Tolle's Power of Now, at the beginning in there, what is it? It's his story of awakening, right? And so all of these great, amazing things, at the core of it, the creator has learned to tell their story in a way that connects deeply to people beyond the mind, at the soul level, at the higher self level. And for you to have the biggest impact in the world in any of these mediums, it's literally the most important skill, the most important thing that you can do. And when you have that, you can put that in everything you do, and it becomes this way that you can bring your medicine, bring your healing, and attract the right people to work with you. And so it's just so important. And people think, what should be my TED Talk, or what should be in my podcast? And they don't realize that they have it all inside them. It's right there. It's right there for the taking. You just have to realize it.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. And I'll just add, we have a client right now that has a brand around mutual care. And what that is that she was taught throughout her life to do selfless service without any expectation of return. And that led her to compassion fatigue and burnout. And she discovered through her psychotherapy practice and through just different things that she does in her work, teaching and everything like that, that if we have structures where we are doing mutual care with each other, it helps to still be supportive and still do your calling in the world, but without that burnout. And she has a story behind it. So she's pitching TEDx Asheville right now. And if she had just led with the part about the mutual care, it's interesting. It's a good idea. Like Richard said, we need a good idea. But her story about how she discovered it was that in the same week, her father got diagnosed with an illness and wanted to live so badly and didn't. And on the other side of it, her mother didn't want to live and attempted suicide. And she led with that story, and she's made it through the first round of cuts because she's not just sharing her idea, she's sharing her story behind her idea. Same thing when I teach people to run their story past a podcast host to try to get on the podcast, which is a bonus in our program. And I've had people get on podcasts with 6 million people in the audience from this little thing that I'm going to share with you, this approach. But when you do approach podcast hosts to be on their podcast, which I widely encourage you all to do, you've got to be able to tell your story in a sentence or two. And they don't want to hear a lot about your background or what you do. They want to know what story and what value you're going to be bringing to their audience. And so that's something that I would love to see all of you doing. And we're going to share a little bit more about how to do that. We also have someone on the Sounds True team that's talking about the importance of story in a book proposal, because that world is just so noisy and publishers get so many submissions. And so how to position yourself in such a way that people are interested. We're not guaranteeing you're going to get a book, but like getting past that first gatekeeper and having people be interested in your story. So I could really go on and on about this, but I want to also respect your time. We're kind of getting to the end of our time together here, which I also want to thank you for, because I know that you're really busy. We're all very busy, and we just appreciate your time and your attention today as well. I wanted to say that too.
The Your Story Matters course begins on November 8th. It's an 8-week online course. It's delivered live, but if you miss any of the live sessions, you can watch the replays. Richard and Kylie, if the person's asking themselves, is this for me? Can you answer the question, who actually is the course for? Who's it designed for?
Yeah, I mean, we work with all kinds of people, but it's literally, I mean, if you're breathing, it's for you, because we're human beings. And but we work with therapists, we work with coaches, consultants, teachers of all kinds, conscious businesses. Kylie's mentioned a few businesses she's helped. If you're looking for a way to differentiate yourself, the market's crowded. I think there's incredible opportunities. I actually believe that next year is going to be one of the best years ever. I know there's a lot of things happening in the world right now that are quite distressing for many of us, but the human spirit is strong. We're evolving, and consciousness is growing. The world needs this more than ever. So one of the ways that you can differentiate yourself with a lot of the tools that are available to you, social media, video, podcasts, talks, books, things like that, is by mastering this and becoming better at telling your own story. So I think it's pretty much, I haven't met a person that wouldn't really benefit from this, but I think what most people don't realize is how critical this is actually for you to have differentiation in the market, because without it, you can kind of just get lost. And you don't want to be copying other people's methods and stuff. You got to find your own way to break through kind of like the collective clutter that's out there, but do it in a way that's aligned with your deepest values and your purpose and your authenticity.
Yeah. And it's also, so it's got two sort of prongs to it. It's for people that are wanting to sell services or products, or, our service providers, like Richard just mentioned. It's also really geared towards people that have a spiritual message or a wisdom message that they want to get out into the world. We're going to be really supporting you as well. And as Tammy kind of alluded to earlier, everything that we're doing in this course and everything we're training you on comes from spiritual principles. So it's not like these hardcore marketing techniques that are going to freak people out. It's really about how do we bring the spiritual side of ourselves into what we're offering into the world. And so it's really geared towards that, as well as the tangible stuff like the book proposals and making videos and website storytelling and, TEDx talks and movement building and all of that. It's really coming from a spiritual framework.
I also just quickly want to add that I'm kind of curious, how many people want to have a podcast and don't have a podcast? Or how many people want to write a book and don't want to write a book, or want to write a book? Like I think that there's this massive opportunity in the market right now to actually create things that have value for future generations. And, TED Talks, books, podcasts, online courses, these are vehicles that can leave a legacy for your children and their children, and can actually provide deep healing for the world too. So there's like this, it's kind of like, I don't know if asset creation is the right word, but it's a way to get your work into the world in a way that can help people. So
We're going to put a link in the chat, so you have that link to learn more about the course, Your Story Matters, beginning on November 8th. Also, I'm hoping to see many of you again for our third and final part of this free series on the power of storytelling. That will happen 1 week from today, October 25th. Richard and Kylie are going to share the conscious story formula, and that will also be our time to bring forward your questions. So I know many of you have had questions, and that'll be your chance next week as part of our third session. And again, if you're interested in seeing the first webinar, if you missed it, or if you would like to watch the replay of the conversation we just had, both of these sessions are available on the replay page, and we'll also put that link in the chat. And finally, Richard, I have to say, I'm happy to hear that you think next year will be a good year for those of us who are speaking and teaching and sharing in the online space. I do know that the voices and the inspiration and the practical activism of people of conscience is needed more now than ever. So I'm happy to hear that, and happy to see so many of you taking up your own human instrument to play your unique music in the world. Thank you. Your story matters. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Richard. Thanks, Kylie.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye, everybody. Have a great day.